I don't know. We'll see. We'll see over the summer. I'm not sure if it's going to stay like that or if it's going to be a starting role. I don't know. Whatever works best for the team, honestly. To me, who doesn't want to start and look cool?
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. And today's Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast is also brought to you by ZipRecruiter. Try it free at ziprecruiter.com/LOFB. My name is Josh Lloyd, and as always, you can find me on Twitter at redrock_bball, on Instagram at redrock_bball, and Patreon at patreon.com/redrock_bball. And of course, this show, as with most others, is streamed live over at Facebook at facebook.com/redrockbasketball. We are looking here at another team for the season in review series of podcasts. We're going to be talking about the New Orleans Pelicans today. So
let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. The Pelicans are a team, obviously, with quite a bit of intrigue after their mid-season trade, and quite a few questions, I guess, with them moving forward as we head into next season and beyond. We'll start by just having a bit of a look back at the team in general from last season. They finished 34-48, somewhat of a disappointing result. They had that chance to challenge for the 8 seed once Cousins arrived. That never eventuated. It was always going to be a stretch at that point, but they can never really get rolling. They showed a few good signs with those together. You can't say that it was a bad trade or anything like that, but didn't get themselves into that 8 seed slot and ended up losing their draft pick to Sacramento as a result of that. Well, not as a result of that. They lost it because of the trade and then couldn't find themselves sneak into the top 3 to keep that pick. They underperformed their actual win-loss record by 1 win, so basically right on where they were expected to be. In the draft, not a lot of excitement for Pelicans fans, and that's pretty much par for the course for this team. They only have pick 40 in the draft. They have traded away so many first-round draft choices over the years, and last year they finally had a top 6 pick and ended up trading that for DeMarcus Cousins. They have very little young talent on this team. They've got high-end superstar talent, but they have very, very little young talent on this team, and that's not likely going to change this year with just that pick 40, which you can get a decent player from it, but you're not going to get a star. You might not even get a rotation player, but you might be able to get something that turns into a 10th man or something like that. So the cupboard is fairly bare when we look at the Pelicans for the coming season, or for the coming seasons. In fact, they're free agents. Obviously, the biggest story here is Drew Holiday, who is an unrestricted free agent for the New Orleans Pelicans. He is the biggest priority, one of the biggest priorities there is in all of free agency that's not guaranteed to come back, like Durant and Curry, which we know those guys are going to come back for the Warriors. Holiday's the biggest one. If he doesn't come back, they're in a lot of trouble. A really massive amount of trouble if he doesn't come back. And they would probably be looking at easily a bottom 10 record, I would say, without Drew if he doesn't, because they don't really have much room to replace him, which is going to be a real problem. They also have Donatas Motiejunas and Dante Cunningham, who are both unrestricted free agents. Cunningham declined his player option to become an unrestricted free agent. And then they've got 3 guys on non-guaranteed deals: Quinn Cook and Axel Tupan, who were signed very late in the season. This team used 26 players during the season, a lot of cycling in and shuffling of guys. I'm not sure whether Tupan and Cook get their deals guaranteed. I don't think they showed enough for us to get too excited about. Cook was okay. Tupan's sort of been in and out of the league the last couple of seasons and showed a little bit, but who knows, depending, I guess, what they do in free agency. And the other one they've got on a non-guaranteed deal, which I'm almost certain will stick around, is Jordan Crawford, who had a really strong finish to the year. And with their lack of depth in the backcourt, you would assume, or I would assume fairly strongly, that he will be back, and they will guarantee that deal for next season, and he will be a key rotational piece for them. They were 26th in offensive rating for the season and 9th in defensive rating, and that defense didn't really didn't really take too much of a hit when Cousins arrived, which some of the criticism for DeMarcus Cousins is his defensive effort, but that wasn't the case when he arrived in New Orleans. He was fine. The offensive rating obviously needs to be worked on, and some of that's due to the absolute horrendous nature of players that were surrounding Holiday and Davis, guys like Cunningham and Solomon Hill and Etuan Moore and Buddy Hield, guys who just really did struggle offensively for that time that they were there in New Orleans. They were the 8th team in pace and actually 4th best in turnover percentage. So that's helpful when you can increase the pace and actually keep the turnovers down. That's a good thing. They just couldn't convert that into good offense. They led the league, in most defensive rebounds, but only 13th in defensive rebounding defensive rebounding percentage, which goes to show you that the pace is obviously a portion of that, and the fact that there was just so many more shots being taken against them that they could only grab the 13th highest percentage of available defensive rebounds, but that translated into the most defensive rebounds. So the other team was grabbing a lot of offensive boards against them as well. And in fact, for that team, the Pelicans, on offense, they grabbed only the 29th most offensive rebounds, so really unaggressive in crashing the offensive glass. And some of that is by design, to try and prevent transition stuff, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but getting those second chance points can be key in keeping a team afloat and helping boost an offensive rating, as we see their one needed a significant amount of boosting. If you look at the best offensive rating on the team, it goes to Dante Cunningham. Omer Ashik comes in second. Yes, Omer Ashik, the guy that had Ebola for the second half of the season and was shithouse for the first half. He was second in offensive rating. I don't think you need to be too concerned about that. Tone Davis came in at number 3 and Jordy Crawford at number 4. In terms of best defensive rating, Boogie, Davis, Alexia Ajinça and Sheikh Diallo were the top 4 there. So 4 big men and a couple of guys that I do like. Diallo and Ajinça as backup big men, but obviously with the 2 blokes in front of them, their playing time and their opportunities are obviously going to be severely limited in future years. They only had 1 player that remained on the team after the trade that went down and their players leaving, that shot over 40% on corner threes, and that was Cunningham. So they obviously need to improve that, and that goes a big way to improving that offensive rating as well. Jordy Crawford at an amazing 83% at the rim he shot. That is a crazy, crazy amount for a guy like Crawford, who is a gunner, and he also shot 60% from the field between 3 to 16 feet. So mid-range jumpers, 60%. Those 2 numbers make me say, and you look at Crawford's numbers, and he was absolutely fantastic for this team, and he was so efficient, and you go, that's not going to be able to continue. He won't continue to shoot 83% at the rim. He won't continue to shoot 60% on mid-range jumpers. He's not going to be able to do that. Nobody is really able to do that. So he's going to suffer a fall in efficiency for next season. So we can look at his numbers and be excited by them, and it's fair enough because he provided nice stats and really good value for the deeper leagues. But you have to factor in a fairly high degree of drop-off, I would think, from that efficiency standpoint, which obviously impacts then his scoring numbers and his overall fantasy value too. So just be aware of that. The discrepancy between Cousins and Davis on this team in terms of the percentage of their 2-pointers that were assisted was stark to me. Davis was assisted on 65% of his 2-point attempts, which is about common for a big man. Get it dumped into you, alley-oops, passed in, quick shot. Cousins, 30%. So we know that the style of DeMarcus Cousins is different offensively. He likes to handle the ball, dribble it around, back guys down, pound it a bit. But that's a massive difference between their 2 big men. 30% and 65% assisted 2-point percentage is a significant difference, and it does highlight the play style difference on offense between Cousins and Davis. Let's look at the advanced stats leaders on this team. No surprise that Tone Davis led the team in PER, 27.5, and true shooting percentage. I think you'd be surprised that Quinn Cook led the team at 61.4, then Dante Cunningham at 58.6. Cousins had the highest usage, 33.1, and Davis at 32.6. Cousins' usage came down from his time in Sacramento, understandably. Davis just smashed win shares 11, win shares per 48, he smashed it. Offensive box score plus minus, Crawford, and a lot of that is to do with that high level of efficiency that he showed. Defensive box score plus minus, Cousins, and he led the team in overall box score plus minus, while Davis led the team in VORP. I don't think there's many surprises really with any of those numbers there. They played just 4 lineups over 100 minutes for the season, and none of those lineups saw over 200 minutes. Alvin Gentry was constantly changing things and making poor decisions for a lot of the time, and that's basically his coaching resume. Key strengths: poor decision making. Still gets a job though. The most used lineup: Davis, Cunningham, Heald, Solomon Hill, Drew Holiday, plus 10.6. Really, really impressive. The problem is whatever was coming after that was disgusting. Ashik playing minutes. I can't even think of the other crap on this. Tim Frazier, who had his moments, but in reality, he's not good. Wayne Selden playing minutes. Just random guys playing minutes. Mota Yunus, who I like, but really didn't show anything at all this season. So just a hodgepodge of garbage on the bench for this team for the majority of the season. Weirdly, though, their top 11 most used lineups were all positive. And they were the ones containing majority mix of starters. And then it was just disgusting. It just got terrible after that to lead this team to be as bad as they were. When your top 11 most used lineups were positive, everything else you're throwing out there must have just been horrendous. And that was exactly the case for the New Orleans Pelicans. Their best 4-man lineup: Heald, Hill, Holiday, Triple H, with Terry Jones. That was a plus 10.1, so impressive there. And their most used 3-man lineup was Davis, Hill, and Holiday, and that was a positive 5.2. So again, the upper end and what they're doing the majority of the time was a positive. Just the massive fall off that they suffered was too hard to recover from. The best 3-man lineup: Cousins, Davis, and Solly Hill. So that's really encouraging that they're out of their top 20 most used 3-man lineups. The best one included both Cousins and Davis, and it was a solid plus 6.1. If we want to go even further to look at how Cousins, Davis, and Holiday performed as a 3-man unit, they were plus 5.7 in 671 minutes, and that is a huge positive. Again, fixing what comes behind them is an issue and being able to stagger these guys, but the fact that those 3 guys, and we saw drop-offs, especially from Drew Holiday in a fantasy perspective when they played together, but the team was actually quite good with those guys on the court together, and that should give Pelicans fans a sense of hope that if Holiday does return, that they do have something that they can build on there. Their best 2-man unit: Davis and Cunningham, was a plus 3.9, and their most used 2-man was Davis and Hill at a plus 3. And I think the 2-man unit that everyone wants to see is how did Davis and Cousins do as a 2-man unit? Well, they were a plus 4.4 in their 395 minutes. So again, there were concerns. How do these guys fit together? How does playing 2 bigs in the NBA work nowadays? They were fine in, again, limited sample size, but 400 minutes is not that small, but plus 4.4 is a good start. And the way that they are both able to pass and stretch the floor and hit threes on offense doesn't make them as stiff as what some other big man combinations could become. They don't have any stash players in the pipeline, so nothing to really look at there for dynasty formats. Now's as good a time as any for me to tell you about today's sponsor, and today's sponsor is ZipRecruiter. It's the playoffs in the NBA, and having the right players on the court will be the key to success. That sharp outside shooter or powerful rebounder can be the difference between winning or losing a NBA playoff game, and your business is not any different to that. Your company needs the right people to be the best. So where do you go to find the top talent? There's no draft for accountants. There's no draft for pharmacists. You've got to go out there and find that person that fits your job or fits your business the best. You can't find the best candidates by posting your job on just one site. You need to post on all the top job sites, and now you can with ZipRecruiter. At ZipRecruiter.com, you can post your job to 100 plus job sites with one click, and then their powerful technology efficiently matches the right people to your position. That's why ZipRecruiter is different to other sites. Unlike those other sites, ZipRecruiter does not depend on candidates finding you. It finds them. In fact, over 80% of jobs posted on ZipRecruiter gets a qualified candidate in just 24 hours. No more juggling emails or fielding calls to your office. Simply screen, rate, and manage the candidates all in one place with ZipRecruiter's easy-to-use dashboard. You should find out why ZipRecruiter has been used by businesses of all sizes right across the nation. And right now, my listeners can start forming their own winning team on ZipRecruiter for free. Go to ziprecruiter.com/LOFB. That's ziprecruiter.com/LOFB to enable you to try it for free and let the good folks at ZipRecruiter know that you came from listening to this podcast. That is ziprecruiter.com/LOFB. Let's now get into these Pelicans dudes and start breaking them down in a more individual basis. We will start, of course, with the man, Tone Davis, who was, I reckon, a key factor in many people winning their leagues this season, mainly for the fact that you were able to get him at pick 9, pick 10, pick 11. Shit, there were people who said that they saw him go at the start of the second round, which was bonkers to me. I had him, I believe, as the 4th or 5th guy. I was pretty confident in his ability to stay healthy. Don't ask me why. But there are guys where I just look at it and go, you know what, I'm pretty confident. And the 3 guys that I was pretty confident with their injuries this year was Rubio, Bledsoe, and Davis. And it all came true. Maybe I'm a soothsayer for predicting health. I don't think that's the case at all. Maybe I got a little bit lucky. But yeah, you got to look at the history of these injuries and why they happened and the nature of them and a lot of things about them to try and gather whether this is actually a problem moving forward, or whether it's going to be a situation that they can overcome. And I was pretty confident with Davis. 75 games, 36 minutes a game, and he had a massive year. He was the 6th ranked player in head-to-head value for the season. In 6th ranked player in 8-cat value. In my head-to-head ranks, he was the 3rd ranked player pre-All-Star and slipped a little bit when Cousins arrived to become the 7th best guy. But still, he got 28 and 12 for the year, half a 3, 2 assists, 1.3 steals, 2.2 blocks, 50 and 80 and 30% from 3 with a true shooting of 58%. How did he go when Cousins arrived? Well, he averaged 28.5 points, which is half a point more than before. He averaged 11.7 rebounds, which is 0.3 less, so basically the same. 2 assists, 1.4 steals, and the only thing that really dipped was his block numbers, down from 2.2 to 1.5. Still shot the same. 51, 80, and 29, true shooting of 58. So the numbers basically the same, just with a slight drop in block numbers for Davis once DeMarcus Cousins arrived. He has been spectacular as a fantasy player. His overall ranks for the past 4 seasons, 6th, 3rd, 8th, and 5th. And we talk about his 2015-16 campaign as being a real disappointment. And I guess it was, because he did see a number of his stats drop and he only played the 61 games. But still, in per game value, he was the 8th best player. In total value, he did slip to 23rd that season. But his other 4 seasons, his last 4 seasons in total value, including total minutes and games played, 9th, 4th, 23rd, and 9th. Yeah, it's pretty impressive stuff from Davis. In terms of looking at the top end of drafts for next season, he's going to be up there again, but people will be cautious. It takes 3 years for people to say someone's not injury prone. All you need to do is look at anything regarding Brook Lopez. Oh, he's injury prone. Hasn't been injured in 3 years, but he's injury prone. And maybe he does get injured again. Maybe anyone gets injured. Maybe I pull a hammy getting up from this table after recording the podcast. Who knows? But in terms of injury-prone labels and the fact that Davis had to miss 8, 9 games, portions of 8 or 9 games this season, it really burns into people's heads, especially people that play DFS who constantly throw out, never roasting Davis again, that's never happening, killed me, bum, soft, and you know that just burns a fire inside me and it makes me so angry because, again, Anthony Davis versus you'll get your ass kicked in less than a second, no doubt about that. Where do we look at drafting him next season? I think you have to value him as close to a top 5 player. The problem is you've got Harden, you've got Westbrook, you've got Yanni, you've got Towns, you've got Durant, and of course you've got Davis and Curry. So that's a top 7 that's pretty bloody good. And having any of those picks, the differentiation maybe between, say, a Harden and a Westbrook, and maybe even not even Westbrook, depending on how you're building a team, those guys, there's a gap. But those next 5 players, you could make an argument to take them anywhere, depending on how a lot of other things shake out and how you're looking to build a team and how you're most comfortable with structuring a side. Those 5 guys, Curry, Durant, shit, I even forgot Kawhi. 6 guys, Curry, Durant, Kawhi, Yanni, Towns, and Davis. The value of those guys is so close. And yes, it was a limited sample size that we saw Davis with Cousins, but those 22 games, and Cousins played 17 of those, Davis averaged 28.5 and 11.5. Half a three, 1.5 steals, 1.5 blocks, and was the 7th ranked player in that time frame. Get him at pick 7, I'd be happy with it. If I took him at pick 5 because I just really want him and I want an efficient big, and Towns maybe went at 4, I'd be happy doing that. And a lot of it, again, is going to come down to statistical and positional scarcity as well, and that's another part when you have those players ranked so closely. But he was ridiculous. Again, this season, he thoroughly deserved his All-NBA team nomination. Smashed it in advanced stats, was all over the place, led the team comfortably and on off at a positive 9.4, which is a huge number. He's just really good, and he's going to continue to be that player that he might not be inside the top 5 as a ranked player, might not get picked inside the top 5, but he's a top 5 player. If that makes any sense, just because of the closeness in the value of so many of those guys in that zone, it's going to be pretty close. Pretty close. They're all going to be sort of thrown together in that one zone. I've got Bobby Madry throwing. He says, "What do you think about Covington signing in New Orleans?" Covington's not a free agent, so I think it's pretty much impossible. He's still got one more year in Philadelphia. I think he's got a team option on him at like $1 million. He's in Philadelphia, so I think it's impossible that he will sign in New Orleans. He'd be awesome because he's awesome wherever he goes, but he is not a free agent unless I'm mistaken, Bobby, which I'm pretty sure that I'm not. Let's talk Boog. We can look at his overall season numbers, and they were okay. But that's not what we're here to talk about, because we don't care really what he did in Sacramento, because things obviously changed. What did he do in New Orleans? Only played the 17 games, had a few injury issues, which has been par for the course for DeMarcus Cousins for quite a while. And you can talk about Davis's injury history. Cousins has played less games over the last 3 years than what Davis has. And a portion of that is bullshit injuries over the last 5 games of a season where they say, you know what, he's just not playing anymore. And to be honest, some of that was Davis last season as well. That they just not that it was a bullshit injury, but they shut him down a little bit earlier than what they would have necessarily done if they had have been in playoff contention. But he played 72 games this year, Boogie, 65 the year before and 59 the year before that. So his injury concern is a problem. Or is it a problem? No, no. Let me rephrase that. It could be a problem. I don't really view it that way though. Cousins, 17 games in New Orleans, 34 minutes a game, 24.5 points, over 2 threes a game, which is just mind-boggling, 12.5 boards, 4 assists, 1.5 steals, 1.3 blocks. And you look at those numbers and you go, okay, shit, 3 times more threes than what Davis hit, an extra rebound a game, double the assist rate, more steals, very similar, slightly less blocks. But the reason that his value is so far down is his shooting percentages, 51 down to 45 as opposed to Davis compared to Cousins. Free throws from 80 down to 78, and 78 is still pretty good. So that causes his value to have a significant dip, even though like post All-Star, Davis was 7th, Cousins was 8th. So that's how close they were, and that's because of the efficiency. So if you're in a situation where you're punting efficiencies or punting field goal percentages, then Cousins' value rises significantly. In head-to-head value, he was 11th pre-All-Star. In my head-to-head 8-2s, he was 11th pre-All-Star, 12th post-All-Star. So it maintained his value. And the usage, yes, that did shrink a little bit when he arrived in New Orleans as opposed to his time in Sacramento, understandably. But he was still able to put up monster numbers, and he is going to be that guy that you look at the back of the first round in that 10 through 15 zone, and I'd be pretty happy with taking him in that Chris Paul, LeBron, John Wall sort of a position. I think that's where he's going to go after that group of 8 blokes that I mentioned earlier. Wall, Paul, and Cousins, unless there's someone else off the top of my head that's falling out of my brain. They're the sort of guys that are going to go in that next setting of players, and I think that's totally fine. We do have, small 17 game, small sample size for sure, but he was able to put up numbers that justified a back end first, early second pick, and I think you'd be fairly comfortable with it. And it's not like the Pelicans are going to be shutting things down from the start of the season and developing things. This is Cousins' last season. He is going to be an unrestricted free agent after next season. So he is going to push, they are going to push, and I think we'll see numbers that are pretty similar. I've got no reason to think that we won't see numbers that do differ from that. But he did suffer a little bit of a drop off in his scoring, but everything else was pretty spot on, and hopefully that can mean, and it didn't last season, but hopefully it can mean we get a bit of a bump in the efficiency. Even if he takes that 45% shooting up to 48, that's an ability to jump 1 or 2 spots in the rankings, and his 3-point percentage for a big is superb, 36% last season from the 3-point line, which if you are carrying that in your leagues, and I am really probably 95% confident that I'm going to be having 3-point percentage in the Red Rock listener leagues this season in place of turnovers as that 9th category, and taking out field goal percentage and replacing it with 2-point percentage as a different way to do things, because I am a massive detractor of turnovers as a category. So I want to try something new and go with the 3-point percentage and 2-point percentage split instead of using turnovers. So Cousins' value as a center who shoots 38% or 36% or whatever he shoots from 3 and on volume is obviously going to be quite valuable. The team was 1.8 points per 100 possessions better off with him on the court, which is a good sign. Clearly not as high as Davis's number, but still a pretty impressive thing. The next member of this team that we need to look at is Drew Holiday. A topsy-turvy season from Drew. Ended the season ranked 48th. Didn't start it on time after his wife Lauren had her brain tumor surgery after giving birth to their baby. He returned, I think, quicker than we anticipated. Initially, we were thinking January, and he came back mid-December. And really got cracking in that January period, and he was flying. He was a guy that I thought preseason, before the injury news, or not the injury, the absence news came out, that he has a real chance to be a top 20 player, and he played exactly like that through January and February. When Cousins arrived, it was a dip in his performance, no doubt. 36th pre-All-Star, 64th post. The other thing that affected him earlier on is Alvin Gentry's general level of incompetence and confusing comments and statements about Gentry. When he came back from not an injury, came back from a family-related absence, yes, which caused him to miss camp, and maybe he couldn't stay in as good a shape as what he would like to, although he was in pretty good shape. And Gentry continued to use Holiday off the bench. And the reasoning that Gentry gave for that is that if Drew plays off the bench, I'm able to give him more minutes. Alvin, that's not how maths works. That's not how common sense works. That's not how good coaching works. Eventually, Drew moved back into the starting lineup and went on a pretty significant tear at one point where he was putting up numbers that were honestly, they were brilliant. He had this stretch through January, February, where there's a game here, 33, 6 and 10, 23, 4 and 11, 26, 4 and 11, 32 and 3 with a Richie Beno as well, 23, 3 and 11, 13, 10 and 8, 39 and 7, 15, 6, 2, 26, 6 and 12, 16, 6, 11, with 10 steals in those last 2 games combined. Absolutely crushing it. And then Boogie came, and part of the reason that it did impact when Cousins arrived was not a lack of usage. It was just for some reason the shots didn't fall. He came in like with games of 1 of 9 shooting, 3 of 9, 5 of 17, 3 of 12. Just shit that you went, okay, well, he should be getting easier looks now, but for some reason they're not falling. So I'm not completely out on Drew being losing a ton of value with Cousins around. He shot 43% post All-Star, 45% pre-All-Star. I think that some of that shooting percentage it can be recovered. I don't see, and some of that's an unfamiliarity with playing with Cousins, but I can see that recovering. He averaged in those games post All-Star 14 points, 1.5 threes, 3.5 boards, 7 assists, 1.5 steals, and an impressive 8.8 blocks on 43 and 76. And his free throw percentage for the year was one of those weird things that for some reason could never get high. He was only 71% for the entirety of the season when he is normally and consistently been a very good free throw shooter. 81, 86, 84 the 3 previous seasons. This year, 71, and that cost him from being an overall player who was a top 25 guy, despite the numerous things that did set him back this season. So, assuming that Drew returns to New Orleans, I think that he is comfortably a top 50 player. I think that he is a guy that we will see that efficiency rise again. I don't think that he will have a true shooting of 51 post All-Star. I don't think he'll have 51 again true shooting, which is what he had post All-Star. I think that will improve those anomalous games of poor, 1 of 9s and 5 of 17s, like these bullshit, why can't he hit a single shot with Cousins around? That will change. The assist numbers stayed fairly strong. He averaged 7 assists post All-Star. He averaged 7.3 for the season. Pretty much the same. His steal numbers, his block numbers, his rebound numbers, like nothing else really changed apart from the fact that his shot didn't go in. And I think that will be able to be corrected. And while I wouldn't go for him necessarily in the top 20, if he is back in New Orleans, and I would assume that he will be, but can't be guaranteed of that. If he is back in New Orleans, then to me, he is a pretty comfortable top 40 player, in my opinion. I'd be happy doing that just because you're paying that premium for point guards, unless you're punting assist, and that does take a little bit of the shine off what Holiday can do. But I am feeling pretty confident in him and Cousins and Davis being able to work out. And if he goes to another team, I believe in Holiday's talent. I believe that he can still become that guy, but the reliance that the Pelicans are going to have on Cousins, Holiday, and Davis is going to be massive, and depending on where else he goes, maybe that reliance isn't going to be quite as large as that, and that might knock him down a bit. But I can't really see myself ever letting Drew slide outside the top 50. He's one of my favorite players in the NBA. And I do think he does get underrated, especially his ability defensively. It can be quite important for a team, for any team that has him on the team. Of course, lots of me saying the word team there. Solomon Hill. Actually, before we get on to that, Matthew Barrett Day, he says, I like offensive rebounds as a category. It secures another possession for the team, so it's similar to turnovers in value, and it's similar in numbers for players. Not quite the same totals over a week, but it's close. That doesn't impact me whatsoever, the totals for a week where the turnovers, offensive rebounds are the same. I have absolutely no, that doesn't impact me at all. The reason that I'm looking at going with 3-point percentage is because turnovers is a negative category, obviously, so it does give that bonus. Maybe if you're a little bit down in games played for the week, gives you some way to be able to salvage something. Adding offensive rebounds is another bulk stat, so it does favor the games volume more, whereas 3-point percentage obviously is a rate statistic, so you can win that category while playing less games and significantly fewer games. Now, while I hate turnovers as being a negative, I understand the value of being able to have those things that aren't pure counting stats, and that's why I'd look to add that extra percentage in there, just because it does enable, I guess, a little level of leveling the playing field between a team who might have 3-4 extra games for the week and a team that plays fewer, rather than it being something that penalizes the good players. It's an extra strategic element in there that you can be competitive in situations where you might be disadvantaged by games played. So that's the way that I look at that. Solomon Hill, yeah. Had a good postseason run in Indiana the year before. They obviously couldn't re-sign him because they foolishly declined his fourth-year rookie option, so they couldn't re-sign him. He came to New Orleans on a 4-year, $44 million deal, which in hindsight probably doesn't look great. It's not terrible, but he was not a great fantasy player. But in saying that, he was still the 144th ranked player, and that is not a terrible position for him to be in. The team was actually 6.3 points per 100 possessions better with him on the court versus him on the bench, which was second on the team behind Davis, and Holiday came in third at a positive 5.6. So he was important with what he did defensively. It's just that fantasy-wise, he doesn't do much. And the difference between what he does from an overall rotisserie point of view, where he was 144th, my head-to-head ranks had him 215th pre and 185th post, because he just offers nothing in a big positive. He's just like, 7 points, 1.2 threes, 3.8 boards, 2 assists, 0.9 steals, half a block. These are just all numbers that sit marginally below average. Nothing being a huge negative, or the points is not a great thing, and 38% from the field is also not great. Minimal attempts though. 81 from the line, nice, but such limited volume that it's just all these numbers are just, there's no bright greens, there's no bright reds. It's all just very pale greens and pale reds across the entirety of his statistical set as you look at the values and that we have over on Basketball Monster. So to me, as a head-to-head guy, he offers nothing. He's not a categorical specialist. He's not helping you in any areas. He's just not a guy that I would consider even in probably 16-team head-to-head leagues. In rotisserie, it is a little bit different. So if I'm talking a 16-team roto, I would like him because he's not giving me massive negatives. He's just providing some solid-ish type of numbers across the board in most areas. And with this team's limited ability to bring in any new talent next season, his role is going to have to remain pretty similar. Now, will they continue to start him at the 3 for next season? I would have to assume so. Dante Cunningham, as I said, has opted out. Whether they bring him back or not, he was the other guy that they used in that position. Solomon Hill is a way better player than Dante Cunningham. Not as good offensively, but he is a better player. So I think that Hill, you got the 30 minutes game this season, and getting that again, I think is a relatively high possibility. But it's not going to mean much for fantasy. Don't expect him to vault himself into the top 100 as a fantasy rank guy. It wasn't like he had a massive down year from 3 or anything. He shot 35%, true shooting of 53. That's sort of about where he is as a player. So I wouldn't be expecting too much more from Big Solly Hill. Eats one more, a guy that had a pretty decent year in Chicago the year before, shot 40% or 45% from 3, I believe, and took his talents to New Orleans. I wish the Bulls had have re-signed him. He wasn't fantastic in New Orleans. I also didn't like the way that Gentry used him, which is something I could say for nearly all players. I thought they should have been given him much larger role ahead of guys like a Tim Frazier, who I'm not a massive fan of as a player, but more was at times shunted behind Frazier, limited minutes behind guys like Hield, who struggled for big portions of the year and ended up playing just 25 minutes a game in 73 games. He did average 9.6 points, 1.1 threes, 2 assists, 2 boards, 0.7 steals, half a block on 46, 77, and 37%. So solid true shooting at 54, decent-ish sort of numbers. But from a fantasy point of view, that made him the 171st ranked player. And much like Solomon Hill, he's just providing little bits of nothing in all categories and nothing standing out to make him a good fantasy head-to-head target. 197th pre-All-Star, 234th post-All-Star. So his numbers for head-to-head leagues, there's not a lot there to love. Now, I think that there is a significant chance, and I think that he should, again, depending on what happens in free agency, where they are somewhat limited by their cap space. He should start next season as the starting shooting guard, and I would hope that enables him to play some pretty decent minutes. Now, he didn't start down the stretch of last season. He started one game, but had quite a few double-digit scoring games on some high efficiency once Cousins arrived and he was able to play with that team. That's the way that I think that they should be looking, is to start him down that stretch, although they do have Jordan Crawford there. I would look to start more over Crawford and use Crawford in that bench role. And they started Timmy Frazier at times, which was poor. They started useless players like Hollis Thompson, Reggie Williams, Wayne Selden, guys that should have been getting nowhere near starting lineups. I would like them to run that more lineup a little bit more and play him a few more minutes, and that might increase his value somewhat. But it's going to be as a 3-point efficiency specialist, maybe a guy that if you are including that 3-point percentage category, that you can use him there, and chuck in a sneaky couple of assists, maybe 2.5 assists, maybe 1.5 threes, but that's going to be 16, maybe, or probably 18 team league valuable, and that's about it. This team's value drops off significantly after we talk about those top 3 guys. Let's talk Timmy Frazier, who was the toast of the town for big chunks of the season when Drew Holiday was out, absolutely crushing it at the start of the year. He's one of those guys that I put into the Tony Roten category, in that when the minutes are there, the stats are going to come. He's going to rack up the stats. The problem is he is not good. I know Matt Smith is like the biggest Tim Frazier fan out there, and he loves Tim, and we disagree on his overall level of ability. I don't think Tim Frazier is good. I don't think Tim Frazier is a starting caliber player for any team in the NBA. Playing him at the 2 or alongside Drew Holiday was a big mistake. He is fine as a backup that plays 16, 17 minutes a game, and that's okay. But even then, I think if you're a good team looking to push to a top 4 seed, he can't be a backup point guard on a team. But as I did mention, when he plays, the stats will come, and there is no doubt about that. He played 24 minutes a game and averaged just 7 points, but half a three, 5 assists, 0.9 steals, 2.5 rebounds. That's where the value comes, is in those assist numbers. He did only shoot 40% from the field, 31% from 3, and 76 from the line for a true shooting of 51, which is obviously not very good at all. But he had games at the start of the year where he was killing it. His first 2 games for the year, 15, 5, and 11 with 4 steals, 21, 6, and 10. And then the fourth game, 23 and 9 with 4 steals and a block. These are absolutely bonkers numbers. He had a triple-double of 14, 11, and 11 with 5 steals, where I believe he was the monstrous line of the night that day. And then not more than a month after that, he went through a stretch of 3 games of scoreless and 5 games of DMPCDs prior to that. Over the last 2 months of this, or post-All-Star break, he scored in double digits just twice. 14-point game against the Rockets and an 11-point game against the Nuggets. Didn't have a double-digit assist game, but played probably more minutes than what he should have down that stretch. And these games where he's playing 36 minutes and 28 minutes and 31 minutes, I would have much preferred those minutes to go to Crawford and to go to each one more. But Gentry, once again, in his infinite negative wisdom, he was playing Frazier and Holiday together. As a source of assists, Frazier can be a really valuable guy. He was 150th in my head-to-head ranks before the All-Star break, in large part because of that extra assist value he got when Holiday was out. Post-All-Star, 315th. And that to me is a more realistic illustration of what he is as a player. He was a negative 1.3 for the year in terms of on-off numbers. He's probably going to be the backup point guard again this year, so that does bring him into that consideration for, say, 16-team leagues. But is he going to be the guy that gets 5 minutes a game? Is he going to be the guy that gets 25 minutes a game? I think he's probably going to be closer to the 18 to 20 minute mark, which could easily get him 4.5 assists with a steal a game and half a 3. And that has value in its own right. But you get no points, you get poor efficiency, and you're going to get streaky performances, and that should relegate him to the really deeper leagues. Now, if Drew leaves and they can't bring in another point guard and they're forced to go with Tim Frazier, well then, shit, they're going to be terrible. But the numbers are going to fly, and he will be a top 100 guy. If for some reason he is playing 30 minutes a game, he will be a top 100 guy. You can write that down. And in that, I agree with Matt Smith, that he is an awesome fantasy asset. His ability to bring big assists, hit some threes, get some steals, if those minutes come. But that is an absolutely terrible option if you're the Pelicans to run with Timmy Frazier as a starting point guard on a team that's looking to do something positive, and I'm not sure that Tim is that guy to actually do anything positive with the team. Dante Cunningham, 66 games, 25 minutes a game for Dante, 6.6 points, 1.1 threes, 4 boards, half a steal, half a block, 48 and 59 is his percentages, but that translated into a 59% true shooting, which is obviously good, and he hit 39% from 3, something which Cunningham was never a 3-point shooter really in his last couple of seasons. He started to develop that, and that was key for him to be able to get on the court, and we saw how much Gentry loved him. He played him at the 4 alongside Davis in those small lineups a lot, which was good, and that worked pretty well. But obviously the addition of Cousins is going to limit those roles where Hill and Cunningham play at the 4. It will still happen at sometimes when they split Cousins and Davis up. You'll get Hill and Cunningham, if he returns of course, playing that role alongside Cousins and Hill. If Dante goes somewhere else, I just don't see anywhere where he's going to be able to get 25 minutes a game. He's not that good. Gentry had an unnatural obsession with his talent, or whatever that was that he was displaying on a game-by-game basis. He's just is a guy that's gritty. He hates saying that word, but he hustles a lot. He's a rebounder that gets down and dirty. He provides good defense, and he can hit some threes, and that is useful in the NBA. It's not all that useful for us in fantasy, and for him to find 25 minutes a game somewhere else, I'm not sure that's going to be all that easy. The team was a 2.4 positive with him on the court, so that's obviously a good thing. And we talked about how all their high usage or high minutes lineups were positives, and he was a part of those. The problem is the absolute crud that they run out for the majority of the other lineups that did cost them their problems. But for him to crack a top 200 rank for next year, I reckon is going to be somewhat of a struggle. After that, we go down into the real dregs of things. We've got Donatas. No, we don't. Let's go to Alexia Jinsa first, who played only 39 games, 15 minutes a game, 5.3 points, 4.5 rebounds, half a steal, 0.6 blocks, 50 and 73, and a 53% true shooting. Now, I like Alexi Ajinça. I think that, or not I think, much like Tim Frazier, when he gets big minutes, he is a must-own fantasy player. The problem is that he is a long way from getting those consistent minutes. He was out of the rotation for long periods of time with this team, and for a team that started Omer Ashik for chunks of time, that was a horrendous coaching decision. Ajinça might not be great, but I can 100% guarantee you that he is better than Omer Ashik. And the fact that he played just 39 games was a disappointment and probably an embarrassment in terms of coaching performances from Gentry. Minus 3.4 with his on-off, so the team wasn't great with him on the court, but we know that when he plays, the fantasy stats will come. The problem is how is he going to play? How is he going to get enough minutes to be a useful guy? I think he's got a real chance to crack the top 300, which is not saying much, but that can be useful for the deeper league guys. But my level of hope of him ever forming himself into a competent NBA starter has dwindled and pretty much completely evaporated. I still don't think he's used 100% correctly in New Orleans. I'd like to see him tried somewhere else, but it's there's not much to get too pumped about with Alexi Ajinça. Jordy Crawford. Really interesting signing for this team. He played 19 games after the All-Star break and was the 132nd ranked player in that time frame. And that's obviously super impressive. 23 minutes a game, 14 points, 2 threes, 3 assists, which was something I was really, really impressed with Crawford, with his ability to pass and distribute and make plays for others. 0.6 steals, but as I referenced earlier, 48% from 3, fueled by that 60% mid-range shooting and 80% at the rim, which are numbers that will not continue. He shot 39% from 3, and that's fine. You can totally see him doing that. I believe they'll guarantee his contract and bring him back and have him play either that starting role or the backup guy behind Etuan Moore or whatever else they do in that position. And that number where he was the 132nd ranked player in just 23 minutes a game, those minutes are realistic. That's a realistic target for Jordan Crawford next season. That efficiency is not, which to me then would bump his value down. It would take him from being a positive field goal percentage guy to a negative. It would drop his points down as well, maybe instead of 14 a game, which I cannot see that being able to be maintained. Maybe he gets 12 a game, and that takes his value down in that category as well. The assists, I believe that he could actually keep up 2.5 assists a game in 23 minutes. I don't think that was too fluky. I think he has improved his game to that degree, and he wasn't just a crazy gunner, which is part of the criticisms that Crawford had throughout his early stints in the NBA. The team was 3.2 points per 100 possessions better off with him on the court, and I would be stunned if he is not a rotation. Actually, that's not true because Alvin Gentry is the coach. I would be stunned if a competent coach didn't play him in the rotation and play him 20 plus minutes and get him in that role, because they do need offense. We talked about that earlier, how much their offense struggled, but he is going to be a key part of that. I can't see that not being the case. And 16-team leagues, I think you want to be on him. 14-team leagues, you might want to have a crack at it, but that field goal percentage is a really, really key indicator of regression. So don't be surprised if that is not able to stick, because those shooting splits are just they're not able to continue. He won't be able to continue that over the course of the season, and that will cause an overall drop from maybe 130th in those 23 minutes. Maybe he's 160th, because small drops in that range causes massive drops in terms of rank. As I've highlighted all the time, that the difference between the guys 100 and 150 or 60 and 100, they're so minimal that even a tiny dip causes guys to tumble 3, 4, 5, 6 rounds. And seeing Crawford as 180th in 23 minutes next year, you wouldn't be surprised, because he shot 45% from the field, and that'd almost be enough to dip those numbers down if everything else stayed the same. Let's talk Donatas Motiejunas. We know the complete, how should I say it, clusterfuck that happened with his free agency, with him not signing a contract with Houston and then being traded then signing a deal with Brooklyn and Houston matching the offer, and then him failing a physical. Then he couldn't go back to Brooklyn with, honestly, BJ Armstrong just screwed everything up. And then Houston cut him, arbitration, suing. It was just a complete nightmare. Armstrong played it as poorly as any agent could. I didn't understand the whole posturing over this stuff. Then he went to New Orleans and was bad. He wasn't good. And I'm a fan of Martinez. Now, he has had ongoing back problems that nullified that trade to Detroit last season. He played 34 games, 14 minutes, 4.5 points, 3 boards. Defensive stuff, it's never going to be his strong suit. Half a steal, 0.3 blocks, hit 0.3 threes, and was terribly inefficient with a true shooting of 47%. Does he come back next season? Who knows? He's an unrestricted free agent. I don't imagine the market is pretty hot for Motiejunas. We saw that was the case when he was in restricted free agency, that no one was signing him to any deals. He didn't do enough in New Orleans that made me think everyone's going to go, oh, cool, let's get back onto Donatas. He was a team worst, negative 10.2 with his on-off numbers, if we don't include Sheikh Diallo, who was a negative 10.3 and played, obviously far fewer minutes and far fewer games than what Motiejunas did. He was just bad, and at this point, maybe he can rehabilitate himself if his back is able to hold up into being a backup big man, but he needs 30 minutes to be even close to fantasy relevant, and that's just not going to happen anywhere. So don't have any high hopes for big Donatas. Speaking of not having high hopes, Omer Asik, 16 minutes a game, 31 games, 2.7 points, but what he is a very strong rebounder. 5.2 boards in those 16 minutes, which is obviously over 10 boards per 36. He doesn't block shots as much as what people might think that he does. 0.4 blocks in 16 minutes is horrible. 47% from the field is horrible for a guy that doesn't take any jump shots. 59% from the line is also horrible. He is just a bad player, and my thoughts do go out to him for that illness that caused him to lose so much weight over that course of the season. Really a bad situation that had him out for a very long time, but he is bad, and there is no escaping that. There is no situation that I would want to own Omer Asik in dynasty formats, in seasonal stuff, unless for some reason Ajinça, Cousins, Davis, Diallo all go down and Asik comes in. But the problem is Gentry played him when he didn't need to play him. He was terrible. What positiveness did Omer Asik provide? The team was worse off with him on the court, minus 3.2 points. Yeah, He was bad, and he is not getting any better. That contract is disgusting. The Pelicans can't afford to attach assets to it to get rid of him. He is going to be stuck there, and he should be a DMP CD in pretty much every game. Let's talk Sheikh Diallo, who I am a big fan of. I think that he has got a solid future in the NBA, and he is a player who is 20 years of age, but he is a guy that has a really good fantasy game. Not like Omer Asik. He has got the ability to put up fantasy numbers, and we saw that down the end of the season when he did start to play some games, and we saw some pretty big numbers from him, and that's what you could expect if he found himself in a big role. Again, Cousins and Davis, the big role's not coming. It's a long way away. Now, maybe if one of those guys gets hurt and he has to come in and play bigger minutes, I don't think that that's too much of a too much of a stretch to think that he would be able to do that, because he is quite good. In the D League, he averaged 2.4 blocks in his 28 minutes. He's been a very good shot blocker throughout his college career. The last 3 games of the year, he played 26, 27, and 29 minutes. The first game there, 7 and 9. The next game, 19 and 11 with 2 blocks. The next game, 12 and 16 with a steal and a block. That's the potential that Sheikh Diallo has. So to me, he is very much a long-term investment in dynasty leagues. Now, whether his value ever comes in New Orleans, whether it comes at another team, or what happens with Cousins. Does he get traded this year? That's a possibility. Does Cousins leave in free agency? Diallo is a long-term investment, but I think that he is clearly their best young player on this team. There's no debate about that. I was stunned that he went as late as he did. He looked good in Summer League, and I thought he looked good in the stretches that he played here for New Orleans, and I'm expecting him to find himself in a bigger role, take over the Omer Asik minutes, take over the Donatas Motiejunas minutes, maybe even take over the Alexei Ajinça minutes, and we'll see, instead of him playing 12 minutes a game in 17 games, that he plays 60, 70 games and plays 15 minutes a game, and that starts to have an impact in 30-team leagues. And it might even start to have an impact in 20-team leagues. That might be a stretch given he was barely inside the top 400 this year. But a jump to inside the top 300, I don't think that's too far to stretch. And he is a low-risk, low-cost dynasty value play if your league is going deep enough. Now, if you're in a 12-man league with 15-man rosters, then holding on Diallo is probably not going to be the greatest idea. But if your league has 250 players rostered, I wouldn't hate having Diallo as one of my guys there and thinking, you know what, this guy could, if things break right, have a couple of top 100 seasons under his belt. I do believe in him that much. I think he's going to be a real interesting target or interesting player to watch develop. The situation is not ideal for him, but I am real interested to see how things happen for him. He put together some good defensive stuff, good defensive numbers, and I am really intrigued to see where Sheikh Diallo can go moving forward. The last two players on this team, Quinn Cook, played 14 games, 13 minutes a game, 5.5 points, 2 assists, 0.8 threes. Maybe he comes on and stays on as a third point guard, plays some backup too as well. Shot 51%, which is obviously very high, 42% from three for a true shooting of 59. Unrealistic to expect that level of shooting to continue for Cook for the season. Still found himself outside the top 400 for the year. Nothing super spectacular about him. The team was 8.3 points better off with him sitting on the bench versus him on the court. So again, nothing super spectacular for Quinn Cook, but this is a real 400 deep leagues. Would want to make sure Quinn Cook is owned, but I don't have very high hopes for him at all. Well, Axel Tupan, I don't think he'll be back for next year. He played 12 minutes in 4 games and didn't do much in his time in Denver. He's a decent wing defender, but I don't think we're at the stage where we need to have high hopes for Axel Tupan at the age of 24, although he does provide decent defense. So you'll see him catch on with some team, whether that may be even back in New Orleans, but I think his skill set is duplicative of, say, a Solomon Hill as well, and he's just a worse version of that. So I don't think they necessarily want that same guy to come in and be their 14th or 15th guy. But I could see him on a roster. I just can't see him being any sort of an impactful player. Let's have a look at the questions that you guys have asked. Ben Almunia Clark. Does any player have their team over a barrel more than Drew has the Pelicans? No. They are in massive strife if he doesn't re-sign. They have to give, if he comes in and says, I want 5-year max, they have to say, cool. Or else they are in a lot of trouble, and then they likely lose Cousins, and they might even get Davis demanding trades. They are in big trouble. They need Drew back. Unless he's just like, I don't care what you dickheads offer me, I'm not coming back, then he is getting a max deal. There's almost no doubt about that. They will have to offer him. They just have to bring him back. Wong Fu, the Pelicans, the best name for an NBA team ever. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's especially when you look at it and the name's announced and they go Pelicans. How menacing is that? It's just a bird, and then they bring out. And then they bring out that mascot that they had, and it was the most frightening looking thing you've ever seen. Just that combination of what kind of a soft nickname is this, and then that, and whatever that was that they brought out, Pierre the Pelican, was horrendous. Top 5 all-time NBA mascot, Pierre the Pelican, or the original version 1.0. The new one, a little bit softer and cuddlier, but he was a nightmare. That guy, loved him. Bobby Madry, he says, would you overpay for Gay or Covington if you're New Orleans? Well, we covered the Covington thing already. Bobby, would you overpay for Gay? The problem here is, Bob, is they don't have the cap space to do it. If they renounce their cap holds on Cunningham, which is 3.9 million, Monty Eunice at 1.5, and Drew Holiday at 16.9, which would be an absolute disaster. If they did that, then they would have $89 million in cap or in caps. In caps. What am I talking about? They would have $89 million in contracts on the books. The salary cap's going to be about $101 million. So they will have $11.7 million. And that is not going to be enough for Rudy Gay. They would have to then trade away guys. And what positive assets do they have to trade away? None. Solomon Hill, are you trading him away without attaching an asset to it? Unlikely. They don't have players as assets. Are they going further into their future draft picks to do that? I'm not sure. Alexia Jinsa, he's not a positive asset. What can you clear out there? He's worth $5 million. Ashik's worth $11 million. Maybe if for some reason you could trade Ashik out, that's $11 million. That puts it on to that 11.7. You got $22 million. Maybe is that enough for Gay? But even then, you don't have a point guard. So I cannot see how they can do that. Again, with that cap hold, with all those cap holds on, they are at $111 million. So they can't sign. They can't sign a guy like Rudy Gay in that circumstance. And renouncing Drew only gives them that 11.7 million, which is why I say it's such a disaster for them if Holiday does not sign, because they can't do anything anyway in that space because they've got just these bad contracts like Hill at 11.7, which is not bad in the scheme of things, but given the structure of this team, it is 8.5 for Eton Moore, 10.5 for Ashik, 5 for Ajinsa. They got whatever this bullshit is with Quincy Pondexter, who hasn't played in 17 years. He's on the books for 3.8. Maybe they can get rid of him with injury exceptions. I'm not sure about that. So they don't have really much flexibility to be able to go out and get someone like a Rudy Gay, unfortunately. But if it worked, if they had that magical cap space, which they don't, then I could see Gay being a guy that they could use. Cousins and Gay actually do work well together, and that might be what they need to do to push. And I think if they had Gay, they would put if his Achilles is fine, which is a big deal. And then would you be happy spending $20 million for 3 years for Rudy Gay coming off Achilles surgery when people don't ever recover from it, and especially at the age of 30? I'm not sure I would. So yeah, it's a situation that's not going to happen, and I'd be hesitant even if it could happen. Jordan says, aside from Brower, Boogie, and Drew, if he's back, who could have top 100 value on the Pelicans? The answer is no one. The answer of the person who gets closest is maybe Eton Moore, if he played 30 minutes a night. But I don't have full confidence in him doing that, and his value is going to be maybe 3 assists, 2 threes, okay efficiency and okay scoring. Jordan Crawford, he's not going to get enough minutes. Solomon Hill's never going to get there. It's going to be Boogie. It's going to be Davis. It's going to be Holiday as top 50 guys, Davis and Cousins as top 12 guys, and it's going to be no one else. And I can't really see much change from that, and I cannot see any other Pelicans guy really even sniffing that top 100. Top 150, yeah, I think you see more in that range, but maybe Hill, but even that's a stretch, and that's about it. I reckon for that one, Jordan, I cannot see much changing with that. All right, we are done for this Pelicans podcast. I'm going to be doing a second podcast today, which I'll get started in probably half an hour's time. We'll be doing the Charlotte Hornets, and getting those two done today enables me to be able to slot in a couple of NBA draft podcasts. We're going to have one next week, which will be middle of next week, and then one the week after, middle of the week after, as we head into the NBA draft. Maybe we'll sneak a third in that week before the draft, but that's the way we're doing it. So we're having two today, so we can sneak all those pods in and get them done before the NBA draft. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. It's a great way of helping out the show. We are done here, guys. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Eat one more.